Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful for this new day, this new morning, and or evening, wherever we are. We just ask, Lord, for your Holy Spirit to speak to us, to make things clear in our minds. Help us to understand the time that we're in and the responsibility that you've given us. Help us to be faithful. We pray for each person, for our families. Pray for those in Nashville. And we ask, Lord, that your mercy can be mingled with your justice. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, so well, good morning, everyone. And this is the third part of our study on the history of Islam, which isn't a lot of history. That's just sort of going through the fifth, sixth, and seventh trumpets. Now, just a reminder here, in our fifth trumpet, we have the first woe, and we have, in the sixth trumpet, we have the second woe. And these woes, even though they are connected with the trumpets, are not the same thing. That is, we know that the fifth trumpet begins to sound with Muhammad's imposture in 606. And then we have the first woe from 1299 to 1449. And then at the end of the first woe, the second woe commences. And also the sixth trumpet commences. And we know that the second woe is going to end on August 11th, 1840. But then we have this 1,533 days to October 22nd, 1844. And initially, the Millerites believed that the sixth trumpet ended here and that the seventh trumpet began to sound. But later they recognized that the seventh trumpet didn't sound till here. And of course, you can see why. If you believe Jesus is coming back in 1844, you're going to have the seventh trumpet begin before then. So obviously, that was why they made that decision. But we can see that October 22nd, 1844 is when the seventh trumpet begins to sound. And so now we're going to be under the seventh trumpet. Now, initially, there was not a lot of clarity about when the third woe began. So there was this idea that maybe the third woe began on October 22nd, 1844 in early Millerite writings. But it really doesn't make sense, because if you look at the first woe and the second woe, these are both Islam. And there's not really anything connected to October 22nd, 1844 regarding Islam. Now, under the seventh trumpet, we of course have a lot of history. We have November 1st, 1922. That's the end of the Turkish Sultanate. And the biblical date here is the 11th day of the 8th month, which of course would parallel the 11th day of the 8th month in 1840. So this connection here between August 11th and November 1st, even though Josiah Litch ended his prophecy here of the second woe, you can see that the Sultanate itself extended to 1922. Now, there are some other events that happen here that we're going to look at. And we know, of course, we have 9/11. And 9/11 would be the beginning of the third woe. So you're going to have the third woe here. Now, there's a lot of misunderstanding about these woes. When we look here in 1299, we know that Islam is loosed, but it's also restrained. That is, there's a restraint that occurs here. That is, they can hurt but not kill. But in 1449, they're going to be loosed here, but they're going to be restrained here on August 11th, 1840. So we see that there's these loosening and restraints, and we haven't really ever addressed these very clearly. Now, in our history, when we look at the third woe, this is actually a restraint of Islam. That is, Islam attacks the Twin Towers, but they're immediately restrained. And we know that they're going to be loosed. And in our history now, we're going to see this loosening of Islam that occurs at the end of the third woe. Now, of course, ultimately they will be restrained as well. So these loosenings and restraints, I'm not going to go into detail about them, what I think about them, but I do know that we haven't really understood them. Now, one other date in here before 9/11, on February 26, 1993, the World Trade Center was attacked by Islam. It was the first attack on American soil by Islam, and the first attack on the World Trade Center. But it didn't result in what we would call the start of the third woe. But it was definitely a warning of what was going to come that happened in 2001. And we shouldn't ignore it, even though I'm not going to go into this at this time. But that date becomes important, and that history becomes important because we have Waco that begins right after that, and on February 28th, and then on April 19th, Waco is burned to the ground. And so we have some symbolism there with the Branch Davidians and the relationship between the Twin Towers and the Branch Davidians, in a sense, foreshadowing us and what's happening to us, and the relationship between this movement and the state. So they do play a role, even though they're not, obviously God's messengers for this time. Now, so we have this history in here, and a lot of people in this movement, Jeff, has focused on the war in Afghanistan. We also have the war in Syria now. So we have this proxy war, these periods of 10 years. And I'm not going to address that so much. I want to look at trying to understand this third woe in relationship to the seventh trumpet. Now, we know that these trumpets are warnings regarding what's coming upon the world. But they're also judgments upon first Western Rome, then Eastern Rome, and then this is a judgment upon modern Rome. And of course, this is the start of the investigative judgment in the heavenly sanctuary. And we know in this year that the horn falls, the first horn of Protestantism falls. And then in our history, we're going to have the second horn fall. Now, we know that with 9/11, we have some things attached to this. One is the Patriot Act. So this is, and if you're going to look at this fall of the United States, it's very progressive. Not just that Protestantism is progressive, but even republicanism is progressive in its fall. But we would say here, when they exchange common law and they put in its place Roman law, that you're guilty until proven innocent, that is a change that happens at 9/11. Now, of course, Islam is here, and I know conspiracy theorists believe that the United States blew up the World Trade Center, and that's an issue within this movement still to this day, even though it's pretty evident that the planes, when they went into the buildings, the point of impact was the point of collapse. No evidence that there was explosive used in taking down the World Trade Center. This is an act of Islam. And just like the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center was an act of Islam. But the main point that we focused upon is that Islam is restrained here, whether one accepts the conspiracy theories or like me is opposed to them. We would all at least agree that there's a restraint here. And we would also agree that God's judgments are being poured out here, or beginning to be poured out, that God touches those buildings. Now, I believe he touches them using Islam, not literally touches them. And so we have this third woe begin. Now, after 9/11, of course, this movement began to really try to understand what had happened prophetically. And we came to understand that this was related to the third woe. So we came to understand that Josiah Litch's prophecy was connected with our history. And so when we came with these predictions regarding what Islam would do, we had, of course, the prophecy of Balaam to look at. And we knew also that Islam, we were going to make a prediction about Islam, and this developed gradually in this movement. So we ended up believing that we were going to make some kind of prediction. And then we got the truth of Raphia and Panium, and we connected Islam with those events. Now we have not seen Islam connected with November 9th, but it is connected with July 18th, which would be Panium. And of course, we variously labeled some of these events. I still think you have to label Raphia as November 9th and Panium as July 18th, even though on one level, and I don't really like these level things, but we didn't see the war between the United States and Russia worked out on November 9th, 2019, in the way that we would have expected. Though there's a lot, Stephen had sent me an email answering a question that someone had asked regarding 2014, 2017, and November 9th, 2019. And one of the things that, and he wanted me to add anything, and one of the things we see about November 9th is that it is connected to the pandemic that began and that we are now under, which Jeff had predicted on January 14th and 15th of 2017, that there would be this pandemic between midnight and the midnight cry. And so we would have to place November 9th as midnight. And also he had dealt with them being Raphia and Panium. So we would have to still say that Raphia is November 9th and Panium is July 18th. But they are a period of time, not just a point, though they do have specific markings. So in trying to relate this to the third woe and trying to understand this in relation to the history of Islam, there's lots of little details that we often miss. So I'm going to share a document here, or at least a picture, a chart, a diagram I want you to look at. And this would be, so.
Beautiful picture.
Yeah, that's not the right, you gotta click on the right one. There we go. Shared screen one, not screen two. Okay, so this is just in my PowerPoint. So this is a PowerPoint diagram. So I write the sentence here: the abolition of the Ottoman Sultanate. I don't know if you can read that or not. Maybe some people can and some people can't. So I'll just zoom into it. That's maybe a little bit bigger. Okay, so the abolition of the Ottoman Sultanate by the Grand National Assembly of Turkey on the 1st of November, 1922, ended the Ottoman Empire, which had lasted since 1299. On the 11th of November, 1922, at the Conference of Lausanne, or Lausanne, Switzerland, the sovereignty of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey exercised by the government of Ankara over Turkey was recognized. The last Sultan, Mehmed VI, departed the Ottoman capital, Constantinople, on the 17th of November, 1922. The legal position was solidified with the signing of the Treaty of Lausanne on the 24th of July, 1923. In March 1924, the Caliphate was abolished, marking the end of Ottoman influence. So there's a lot of dates there, But when we look at the fall of the Ottoman Empire, these are the dates that secular history would look at. They would see that it's in 1922 to 24 that we finally have the end of the Ottoman Empire, and it happens in various stages. First the abolition of the Sultanate, the Ottoman Sultanate, and then later on we have this caliphate being abolished. Does anybody really know the difference between the Sultanate and the Caliphate? Anybody got any ideas on that? What the difference is?
Isn't the caliphate an informal thing?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, the first caliph and the first caliphate was Abu Bakr. So, and we have had a caliphate that was recently set up, but not necessarily recognized by everybody. So it means that somebody is the successor of Muhammad. So it's obviously not necessarily the Sultan. The Sultan is more the government, the secular power. The caliphate is more of a religious power, but often associated with military as well.
Did we identify that who succeeded Muhammad, or did
well,
he ever?
we know who succeeded Muhammad. It was Abu Bakr. He was the first caliph.
How about this last one that didn't quite?
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
Al-Baghdadi, yes.
Yeah. Now there's another one that's been appointed after him.
Okay.
So this would be a caliphate recognized by ISIS, but not necessarily by all Muslims. So I mean, that's part of the thing is, even if you set up a caliphate, who recognizes it? I mean, there's obviously Shia and Sunni Muslims, so they all obviously have differences, and they're not going to recognize a caliph set up by the other group. So, but the point is, these are one is more religious, and one is more secular. One is more civil, right? Government. So the Sultanate would be more the government, where the caliphate would be more the that would be the state would be the Sultanate, the caliphate would be the church. But of course, they're very mixed together within Islam, so it's not as clear cut as that. Now, so we have this conference in Switzerland regarding Turkey, and then we have, of course, the last Sultan, Mehmed VI. He leaves Constantinople after that. And then we have the signing of the Treaty of Lausanne on the 24th of July, 1923. So in this history, we see the end of Islam. And I kind of liken this to what we see with the Catholic Church when it receives a deadly wound. I mean, we see that this is, of course, progressive within Islam, this fall of Turkey. But, once you get to, the 20s, if you look at the Islamic world through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, into the 70s, the Islamic world doesn't really look like it does now. That is, you don't see women everywhere with burqas on. You don't see all the head coverings. You don't see men dressed the way they are now. Men wore suits. So there's been this revival within Islam of a traditional type of Islam, a religious Islam. And really Islam became very secular during this long period. Obviously there was the religious elements existed, but for the most part, you could go to an Islamic country and it wouldn't really look Islamic in the way that it does today. So there's obviously been a revival of radical Islam that has occurred since the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So you would think that the Ottoman Empire ended. And when the second woe comes to its end progressively from August 11th to March 3rd, 1924, you have this, this period of decline till finally what I think Josiah Litch was thinking was going to happen. Just basically Turkey would end. It didn't end all in one strike. Obviously, the part of the second woe ended once they yielded to the four Christian nations that undid what happened at the beginning of the first woe. But for the
the Ottoman Empire to be completely gone, that didn't happen, until the 1920s. Now, I'm going to have to zoom out a little bit so you can see this chart. Let's see if that looks okay. So you can see obviously a little bit more here on the side, and I have these days numbered. So I counted the number of days from October 22nd, 1844. Then maybe I could have counted from August 11th, 1840, but I didn't. In this case, I counted from October 22nd, 1844, because I'm looking at the seventh trumpet. And so under the seventh trumpet, we have this further decline of Turkey. And then I count from the Treaty of Lausanne on July 24th, 1923 to 9/11. And you can see they're close to the same number of days, 28,986 in the first case and 28,539 in the latter. Now, if I add these two together, you might not be able to see that, I get 57,525 days. And I can divide that number of days by 2, and I get 28,762.5 days. So I found it interesting from October 22nd, 1844 to July 24th, 1923 is 28,763 days. So you might not be able to see that. But the point here is that there seems to be a mathematical connection between these dates. Now, the number of days between the Treaty of Lausanne and the Caliphate being abolished is 223 days, which is 10 days and 7 months. So I thought that was interesting in that it has that symbol that we can connect to October 22nd, the 10th day of the 7th month. So there seems to be another connection there. Now, in trying to understand this connection about 9/11, I've counted this different ways and tried to grasp what it meant. And so I'm going to look at a letter here. I'm going to zoom into this. And this usually works pretty good. So this is a letter that I had sent to Jeff. I don't know. This is not the part I want. Here's the part I want. So it was after listening to one of his presentations. So it would have been in April. So this was on April 7th that I sent this email to him. I say, after listening to your presentation, I have some thoughts on something that has puzzled me. I've tried to connect 9/11 to July 18 in our history. The number of days, 6,885, from 9/11 to July 18th, 2020, had so far failed to provide any results. So I'm just talking about how I came to understand that there was some significance in these number of days. The 1,335 days or years ended on the first day of the first month in 1844. I do not know if you are aware of the 153, which is found in the Bible in John 21, verse 11, a symbol of midnight. So that's the 153 fishes that were in the net. The meaning of this symbol of 153 has always been understood by me as a regiving of the message, as in to prophesy again. Now, if I take the number 46, the number of years from 1798 to 1844, and I divide it by 3 for the 3 angels' messages in 46 years, we can get the number 15.33333. So we can get that 153, but also that 1533, right? So the 1,533 days as well. So Miller's prophecy ended on the first day of the first month in 1844. They were to prophesy again. Miller believed that the 6,000 years ended at the end of the Jewish year in 1843, and he had added 153 years to Ussher's date of 4004 BC for creation, with 4157 BC for the year of creation. So So Usher, this 153, I took as a symbol by looking at how Miller had addressed the end of the 6,000 years. That is, he believed that the world ended after 6,000 years. So he believed that 1844 or 1843 would be the end of the world of 6,000 years from creation. And he used Usher's date of 4004 BC, and he added to it 153 years. And so he believed that the world was created in 4157 BC. We believe it was created in 4046 BC. Now, the Millerites prophesy again at midnight on the 21st of July, 1844, in the midst of 187 days of tarrying. And we know Snow's letters create a chiasm of 153 days. That is, when we count from February 16th, 1844, to July 18th, 1844, it's 153 days. Now, if we count the first part to get the center of that chiasm is May 2nd. And if anybody wants me to draw this out, I can if they're a bit confused about it. But it's 77 days plus 77 because the first 77 days we start with 1, not 0. So it's not 154 days. It would be if we included it, but the normal count would be 153 days. So this brings us back to the number of days from September 11th, 2001 and July 18, 2020. If I take the number 6885, the number of days between those two dates, and divide it by 153, I get 45. And we know 45 is the symbol of the 45th president of the United States. Now, the 1335 can be represented by 135. So we can, just like with the 1533, it can be represented by 153. The 135 can be represented by 135. And if I take that same number and I divide it by 135, I get the number 51, which is a symbol of the fifth day, or the first day of the fifth month. So it's also a symbol of the midnight cry. If we count from August 11th, 1840, the 135th day is March 22nd, 1844, the day after Miller's prediction for having the year 1843 end on March 21st, 1844. And of course, if we counted, and that's we're counting August 11th as 1, not as 0. So this brings us past March 21st. So again, it becomes a symbol of this prophesying again. From August 11th, 1840 to February 22nd, the date of publication of Snow's first letter is 1290 days. So we can see that Snow's letter and all these things are connected. And that's where we take this number 6885. Now, the 26th day of the fourth month in 1844 is August 11th, which is an interesting point. And in 1533, the Israelites left Egypt on the 15th day of the first month, which was April 26th. April 26th is a symbol of the 26th day of the fourth month. And the first day of the first month in 457 BC was April 26th as well. So in trying to understand then, in trying to understand 9/11, so I'm going to go back to the screen here. I have all these dates and this history. And what I'm showing is that these events here are connected numerically to here. And also 9/11 is connected numerically to here, based upon its relationship between July 18th. So I know not everybody's going to remember all those numbers. I can forward the email to everyone with that information in it and the diagram that I had regarding this history. But it's just when we get to July 18th, we know that 9/11 began this series of events, which is the arrival of the second angel's message, but also the empowerment of the first angel's message. And now we're moving along in the line of the Levites within Seventh-day Adventism to say that this is going to be the midnight cry for Adventism, July 18th. So under July 18th, we're now going to give a message to the Levites, and that this is going to culminate in the Sunday law that's going to come after December 25th, 2021. So we have this period of time in which to prophesy again, just like we had here in Millerite history. Basically, and they had different prophesyings again, if you wanted to look at it, but October 22nd, 1844 becomes, you have to repeat these messages. And so now we know at the time of the end, we have these messages repeated, but these messages have to develop and grow until they are empowered. And so July 18th is going to parallel August 11th, 1840. Now, so this is the empowerment of the first angel's message, and this is the empowerment of the first angel's message. But we would say that this then is the empowerment of the second angel's message. But it's an empowerment. So any of these empowerments do parallel each other. But in this empowerment, just like this one, this is the first, this is the second. When we look at 1844, the message that's given in that empowerment is the midnight cry about October 22nd, 1844. Because that's the time that was given for the Millerites to present. This is the time that we're given to present. We're not presenting the second coming. We're not presenting the close of probation as a time. We're presenting this event. And this event is paralleling this time, August 11th, because we're using this history, Revelation 9, to make this prediction. And we're also Ezekiel. So we know that we're dealing with the destruction of Jerusalem, the church. So it is also a message to Adventists. So this July 18th message is not primarily to the people in Nashville or the people in the world. It's primarily to Adventists. And Adventists are the ones who are going to have to make sense out of what we did. The world doesn't. They don't need to, and they're not going to be able to make sense out of it, in the sense that we see that our message is an unfolding of Adventism. It's an unfolding of new light that establishes old light. And the world doesn't necessarily understand that. They don't understand Adventist history. Obviously they'll understand some of it, but they're not going to see the significance of these events as an Adventist would, who has been studying the Bible in the spirit of prophecy. So the understanding, this message that's being given to Adventists are the ones who have to then accept that we were correct in our methods to arrive at July 18th. Now, as far as addressing this as a history of Islam, we know that we are going to have 3 strikes. So we take 9/11 as the first, July 18th as the second, and then we're going to have December 25th, 2021 as the third. Now, we don't really know much about December 25th, 2021, other than that we've marked it as the end of this period, what we would call Paneum, from July 18th to December 25th, 2021. So I don't know if we really have a grasp, and I don't think that we need to at this point, on what December 25th, 2021 will look like. I would think, based on what happens on July 18th and the events that follow, we would then have a better understanding regarding December 25th. And this is one of my other points regarding many of these dates that we have been given that follow this history. And so we've had some speculation of what these different dates mean, and we also passed some dates, and those dates that we passed we found to be significant symbolically. July 10th definitely has a significance. July 4th had a significance. June 27th had a significance. But we didn't find external events marking those really. They're more internal events and they're more symbolic. But now July 18th, this date that's coming up, we expect an external event and this is part of the question that in Stephen's email that he sent to me with this answering this person's question, is we look at 2014, what are the external events, what are the internal events? In 2017, what are the external events, what are the internal events? And the same in November. So we have internal within this movement, Tess being shown to be a false prophet, the division that happens, the close of probation for the false priests. But we also have the start of this pandemic. So that would be an external event. And obviously here, 9/11 is an external event, but it wasn't predicted as to the time. But we can look back and see that it is connected numerically to this history. Also as a symbol, it's connected. 9/11 and 11/9 have this symbol attached to them. And I've looked at all the different cycles and patterns with 9/11. Now, part of this history, of course, that we have is what happens in 1945, which isn't really about Islam, it's about Japan. But Japan is a symbol of Islam. They're both from the East, and they both have suicide bombers. And of course, what we see between Japan and the United States is a battle. We see the Pearl Harbor, and then we see the response to Pearl Harbor, which is Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we see the same thing here now in our history. We have these battles going on between the United States and Islam. And now Islam here is striking, but we know also the United States, they came against Kuwait, they came against Iraq, these fighting against Iraq. And so this war that occurred in the United States, with the United States and Islamic countries also occurred in these proxy wars, both in Afghanistan and then in Syria. So there's a lot of history there that obviously I don't have time to go through. Now, I have touched before on Bashar al-Assad, who's the president of Syria, and that he has interesting dates connected with him. He's born on September 11th, when is he born? I know, I can't remember the year. I think it's 65. Yeah, September 11th, 1965. And he's going to have some interesting dates where in July 16th, in the year 2000, he has his inaugural address. And then on July 18th, 2007, he has his second inaugural address every 7 years, which I found interesting. And then in 2014, he has, I think it's on July 17th. If I remember correctly, I could be wrong about that date. But again, he has an inaugural address. And he would have one in 2021. Oops. So you're going to have 7 years. In 2021, if he continued, it would be around the same time. So he has this July 18th is in the center, at least if you take these two periods of 70 years, July 18th is in the center of it. So I think that's significant. And of course, the September 11th date with his birth. Now, so my suggestion is that this nuclear attack is initiated by Syria through Russia, that's their main ally. Syria's main ally is Russia. And Syria may think that they're going to benefit themselves in this way. I'm not sure why, but Russia is the one who is really trying to be benefited by it. And Syria then would be blamed. Russia ultimately would be recognized as the one who's really caused this problem. So in trying to understand, things like this, people's birthdays, and fitting it in these events in somebody's life, trying to attach this to July 18th, I think is a valid analysis. If I did this after the fact, this would be a really valid analysis. But I don't know if I can predict anything by this, other than that we have these coincidences and we can know that Syria is at least involved in this proxy war. And however the events occur, we know that this is a result of what's happening now. And so part of my view of this, dealing with Russia and Syria and what happens on July 18th, we know that right now the United States is in a weakened state. They're going through a revolution and a civil war. And we also know that the United States is being strongly hit by this pandemic. Whether you believe all the media about what's happening in the United States, it doesn't really matter what the actual results are as far as how many people are died or how many are infected. The thing is, it affects the United States based on the decisions that the governments have made and the paranoia that goes on. And so we're seeing that the pandemic didn't just abate, once they tried to return to a normal life. We're seeing that things, at least as far as in the media is concerned, are getting worse. Now, of course, I would say that they're doing lots of testing, so they have lots of positives. I don't see the positive tests. But I don't see that you have a lot of deaths associated with COVID-19 compared to what you did in New York or in Italy or in Spain. So to me, it's just because you have a lot of people being tested positive, you don't see a lot of deaths associated with it. So it seems like the panic doesn't really make much sense. But of course, it's a battle right now in the United States because everything is about Trump. Even a health crisis is all about Trump, trying to make Trump look bad. And of course, he is bad on one level at least, if not more, for the United States, even though he may believe he's trying to do good. So when we look at July 18th, then, trying to understand what that's going to mean to this situation that we're in, I want some thoughts about that. I know we've discussed it before, but, talking to one of my guitar students who's really concerned about what's happening in the world, he says, even if Nashville is not hit by a nuclear attack, he still believes the world's coming to an end based on what's happened this year. He cannot see that the world's ever going to go back to what it was. And, and if it did, if July 18th doesn't happen and the world goes back to some kind of normalcy and we just go back to, the status quo that we grew up with, I can't see that happening. There's just too much corruption and evil in this world. But let's say if it did, that would obviously be a failure in some way of this movement in giving this message. Would be a failure in my view. That's just what I think. But anyway, any thoughts on this this attack on July 18th and what it means to the United States, what it means to the giving of this message? Is that like some input here? And this one was July 17th. And this one's July 16th. There we go. Okay, somebody had something to say?
Well,
We're
if I
looking
may,
at a huge turn. Go ahead, Rudolph.
sorry. Yeah, so I totally believe something's going to happen as well, being probably the newest one, yeah. But I would have thought that, if we are following the Millerite history, this must be the event that causes a revival. Now, if that revival isn't this, what is it? I can't see that there would be anything else. It may like be a few days later, and maybe it's the 27th. Who knows? But at some point, it is going to happen. There's way too many nuclear arsenals all over the place for it not to eventually go off. So I would say we're either just going to go back and look at the chart again and go, well, what did we miss? Or because definitely there is something behind the July the 18th. Apart from that, I do agree with your student, your music student, that if you look at pestilences, you look at everything that's just happening globally at the moment, never mind the bomb. If you look at China, is busy, showing muscles against everyone. It is just, it's going to brew. And the third point is the birth pains. How long can the next lull be, if you like? This is definitely what a birth pain this year is, a massive one. We may have had one a few years ago when there was another recession. There's always been all this weather calamities going on. And what, are we looking at another year gap before we see something like this again? I don't think so. It feels like it's almost, with the fake global warming, I think global warming is just one of those things that they try and make you think of global warming. But, this is exactly the signs before Jesus comes back. It may be turned into global warming, but how long can it be, really? It's, in my mind, it's, we're there. We are standing on the doorstep of this time of trouble, or this, it's going to get worse. So just, if there's a year gap, I'll be surprised before it gets worse from now.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. Well, I would agree. And you brought up a lot of different points there. I mean, I'm a scientist, not necessarily trained, but I've been an amateur scientist since I was a child. I've always read tons of science. And that's how I became a Christian, was studying the science of geology, and came to the conclusion that the best explanation for all the geological layers is not gradual disposition of layers, but actually is a flood. And so I accepted the worldwide flood before I became a Christian. So I wasn't even necessarily, I believed that the Bible was correct in what it recorded as a historical event. It took me time to then say, well, then now I believe actually the Bible, even though I was sort of a Christian, I was raised a Christian, but, in a very liberal Christian household. So God was just a concept. So to actually have a personal God, I first had to come to believe in creation, was through science. But anyway, that's kind of an aside. But the point about science is, when I looked at the science of global warming, and not from a political point of view, just from science, I saw that there was no evidence that CO2 had anything to do with the rise of temperatures, and that it actually is the result of the rise of temperatures, not the cause. Correlation is not necessarily causation, which was the assumption. Because we have a correlation between CO2 rise and temperature rise, then that means it's the cause. And that really made no sense scientifically. And many scientists would agree with that. But we know behind it all was this political agenda, which is a socialistic agenda. And so we saw this develop, those of us that were aware of what was happening, we saw develop all these things behind the scenes, and we just didn't know how they were going to come together. And so what we saw over these last couple of years is how all these different issues came together, and they came together really in 2020 with the pandemic. So we saw then the government control of our lives, that the government has control of our lives, even though they say that we're free. It's just not true. It's a whitewash. And then, of course, we saw then with these riots. So we saw the fruit of what has been building with the young people in the world, these socialistic and communistic ideas that they've been brainwashed with from their education. The tax dollars have been paying for all this time, and we just see the fruit of it. That we have a whole generation of people who have no sense of what reality is. And so we see it all culminating here. But now we know that this July 18th event has to occur for this to even really make sense, at least in my view, because we see all this stuff coming together. And if it just sort of fizzled out, I don't see that it could. Now, maybe things get worse and worse and worse, and then we end up with a nuclear attack, and it somehow fits into the date, and we didn't really understand our chronology correctly. I mean, the chronology is correct, but what it symbolizes, maybe we didn't understand that. But everything points to July 18th as this attack. And so just it's the thing that makes sense, and that's why this one video I watched where this guy was making jokes about, humor, satire regarding about 2020, putting it as an astrological forecast of what's going to happen to you in 2020, but he finishes off with this nuclear attack. That is just the logical progression. If you think about things getting worse, the thing that would have to happen is a nuclear attack, a nuclear war, something that escalates this even to a worse degree than what we've seen so far. Because basically 2020 has been a terrible year, economically and socially, politically. The world's just falling apart. So
Yep. No, I would agree with that.
it just is logical.
Mm.
Now, you brought up another point too, which Chuck probably would want to comment on, having to do with China. And this was brought up by my guitar student yesterday regarding China, because he sees what's happening with China, this war, this Cold War, so to speak, between the United States and China that's been going on. And he, what's the role of China in prophecy? And we know that Sinim is only mentioned once in the Bible, which would be China. And I've wondered about the role of China. And the answer I gave him, well, China is part of this atheistic movement. I mean, even though we look at the Soviet Union as the main player, it's that atheistic communism that arose and that was attacked. China's always been there on the sidelines watching. So I don't know what role China has. I don't look at it as a major role. I know Chuck has some ideas about China, but I mean, obviously they play a part, and they play a part economically. The thing about this world is, if the world continued, to go on and on, we would see the fall of the United States, and we would see the rise of China. Right? I mean, that's what we would see if you're going to look 30 years from now, if you're going to try to forecast based on what's occurring in the world, you would see that the West is in decline and that China is on the rise. I mean, that would just, and many economists and many different political scholars and so forth, this is what they see happening. China, because America is declining, this is Rome, it's falling, it's crumbling, and the Mongol hordes would basically come in and destroy it. And that's the way that the world would look at it. But we see, of course, that this is really about Russia at this time, the United States, and the papacy. We know that that's, and then the United Nations. So in order to stop what's happening, at least from the point of the United States, is really to gain control of the world. The United States, if it's going to survive, in their minds, we need to become the United Nations. The United States has to control the world. And that's what we see, is this battle for the control of the world. You have Russia. At one time it was the Soviet Union, but still it's Russia. You have the papacy that wants control of the world. And you have the United States that wants the control of the world. And this has been the battle ever since the Second World War. So, to try to put China in there prophetically, it doesn't serve a role such as Islam would serve, or Russia, or the United States, or the papacy. But Chuck, you have some comments on that. I know you want to comment on.
Yes, and you just turned on the light. Yesterday, military intelligence knocked on my door. And
okay, so what do you mean they knocked on your door? Like they came to your house?
they called me on the telephone.
Okay, so you gotta not use metaphor. Okay, so military intelligence talked to you and phoned you and asked you what?
They're asking me about July 18.
Okay.
And the light that just came on. You remember me talking about the Chinese guy that I met
Yes, the
Now,
atheist that you're going to meet with.
this guy's not your average person. You saw that he's in Silicon Valley, and he's
In AI.
really into AI.
Yeah.
He's really into digital currency. He
Mhm.
wrote books on it. But this guy is an operative. It just dawned on me. Now I suspected it because
So he's a spy, you're saying, an operative.
yeah, he works for the Communist Party. And what told me that was his physical conditioning. And he is currently somewhere between Anchorage and Denali,
Oh yeah.
where there is a North American radar facility
Okay.
for early warning, and it scares me to death. This guy is not just a computer geek. He knows the ins and outs of the early warning system.
Okay.
And there's people listening to me all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever told you I've got cockroaches in my house. They're not live bugs, but they're live bugs.
Yeah. Okay.
The-
and it makes sense, Chuck. I mean, obviously, I mean, if you talk to a guy, who is some kind of operative, I mean, the government is going to be keeping its eye on all kinds of people. I mean, I'm sure they're looking at my papers and looking at the videos, and I mean, anything that's going to be dealing with some kind of attack on the United States, they have to look at.
I've given them tons of information.
Yeah. So when they asked you this question about July 18th, what did you say to them?
They're getting ready to park the commercial fleet, and they're going to INS instead of GPS on their military fleet.
What's INS?
Inertial navigation system. It does the same thing as GPS. It locates. You can go from point A to point B on GPS.
Yeah.
But inertial navigation system.
Yeah, I understand how that works.
Is an internal system.
Yeah.
It doesn't need any outside input.
No, you
It
can
uses
know
gyros
based upon how you've moved. Yeah, your gyros and everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand how that works.
So that's what their intention right now is. Ground the UP, ground almost all the small camels, the 737s and such,
Yeah.
are using GPS. And
Yeah. They used to use INS.
yeah,
And spaceships used to use those as well, to
Yeah,
keep oriented.
our military fleet has both boxes.
Yeah.
But the 135 is really using a lot of.
So they told you this, that they're
Blended.
switching to INS? They told you that?
No, after what I told them, they're considering it.
Okay.
I'm actually in touch with MI out at Elmendorf, and we've got all kinds of Russian stuff going on out here. We've got YF-11s screaming out here at Mach 3, running to the border and picking these guys up.
Russia's being very aggressive right now.
Yeah.
They're testing American defenses all the time.
Yeah, we've got the Bear, their nuclear bomber.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great big prop airplane, got props the size of like 24-foot props going both directions on each engine. It's a huge airplane, and it's not very fast, but we can see it coming real good.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so with China, the question is more about China here. What was the role that you had about China? I'm trying to remember why you thought it was important.
Recently, the Chinese government notified all its people, all its students, they're operators, these students in England and across the world. They didn't name the United States, but they notified every one of them that they are to support the motherland. And when you start talking about motherland in these communist countries,
Yeah.
you're talking about war.
Yeah. No, so I mean, I definitely think that if there's attack on the United States by Islam, United States, one is their internal weakness is showing right now, and many of these other countries will see this as an opportunity to put more pressure on the United States. So how things are going to unfold, I have really no idea, but I can definitely see. That the vultures are gathering around the United States, seeing that the United States is coming to an end, and looking. Every country looks at their positioning, especially the powerful nations, of how they can take advantage of the situation. So, anyway, that's my final thoughts on. I shouldn't say final, but for now, today, my final thoughts on Islam regarding July 18th and their history. And yeah, running your microwave is not going to kill listening devices, Angela, even if somebody told you that. There's no scientific basis for that whatsoever. But anyway, lots of people put out all kinds of crazy stuff about science that they don't know anything about. But anyway, we have this. Somebody says Truman Ott has a Chinese Jen speaking. What is she writing there? Speaking of attacking North America on his DVD back in 2009. I was collecting similar threats in 2002. I'm not sure who Truman Ott is. But yeah, so we do know anyway that there are countries that want to see the United States taken down. Russia is one of them. China is another. And Islam, of course, as a radical Islam, is definitely wants to kill the great Satan. So to say that, when people sort of mock the idea of a nuclear attack on the United States, it really makes no sense to me. I think it's something that would be inevitable, just something that we don't want to think about. We don't want to think about these types of things occurring. We would just rather live in our fantasy world that everything's just going to be fine, but it's not. And we've seen that in 2020. And if you haven't seen it, if you know somebody who's just totally in denial about it, there are very few people that are. Most people know, except Seventh-day Adventists, that something's going on. Adventists just have a hard time accepting it. So let's close in prayer, and then we can say our goodbyes. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for the time that we had to study, even though it's somewhat so many things that we would want to study and understand, and that we don't. So much history that we don't fully comprehend. And we know, Lord, that you have many things still to teach us in our own personal lives. Help us to be faithful to the light that you've given. Help us to walk in it. Again, we lift up the people in Nashville, the people in the United States in our prayers, that those searching for light will find it. And that even though there's severe things coming, we know, Lord, that you are a merciful God and that you give people opportunity. And we know that there are many people looking for truth and light, and we ask for your protecting hand upon them. Be upon us, protect us from the assaults that have been happening within this movement to turn each other against one another. Help us, Lord, to trust in you and to act as Christ would act in these situations, to not make decisions based upon how we feel, but based upon principle. Be with us throughout this day and throughout the preparation day tomorrow and through Sabbath. And help us, Lord, to glorify you in all that we do. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.